The British political system has just suffered a catastrophic cardiac arrest. The scenes emerging from the House of Commons this afternoon are not just disorderly, they are the death rattle of a government that has lost all authority to lead. Keir Starmer stood at the dispatch box, attempting to deliver a routine statement, but within seconds, the chamber descended into absolute bedlam. The shouting was deafening. The speaker's calls for order were rendered pathetic, drowned out by a wall of fury that seemed to come from every corner of the room. And at the center of this storm stood Nigel Farage, orchestrating a brutal, calculated dismantling of the Prime Minister's legitimacy live on national television. This was not a debate. This was a public execution of a premiership. The visuals are shocking. MPs standing on benches, papers being thrown, and a prime minister freezing in the headlights of a political juggernaut he has no idea how to stop. For months, the tension between Starmer's faltering administration and Farage's insurgent reform movement has been building like a pressure cooker with a welded valve. Today, that valve didn't just leak, it blew the roof off the Palace of Westminster. Security details were seen moving into the chamber, a sight that should chill every observer to the bone. When uniformed officers have to step onto the floor of the Mother of Parliaments to prevent physical confrontation, democracy is no longer functioning. It is dying. But what makes this moment truly terrifying is not the noise, it is the silence that followed. For a brief, agonizing second, Starmer looked to his own backbenches for support, and he found nothing. No wall of noise to defend him, no loyalists jumping to their feet, just a cold, hard silence that screamed louder than any heckle. His own party watched him crumble, and in that instant, the entire country saw the truth. The government is paralyzed. The prime minister is a ghost in his own house, and the man dictating the narrative is no longer the man in number 10, but the man leading the insurgency from the opposition benches. If you are watching this unfold and thinking this is just another day of theatrical politics, you are wrong. This is the moment the dam broke. The markets are already reacting, with the pound twitching nervously as traders realize Britain is effectively leaderless. This is a level of instability that G7 nations simply do not survive without permanent scarring. The footage of Farage laughing as Starmer attempted to speak is already circling the globe, framing Britain not as a serious power, but as a chaotic, ungovernable island. The establishment has lost control. The script has been burned. And the question on everyone's lips is no longer if the government will fall, but how violent the landing is going to be. Make no mistake, the events of the last hour are irreversible. You cannot unsee a prime minister losing command of the Commons. You cannot undo the image of a parliament descending into mob rule. This is the new reality. The polite veneer of British politics has been stripped away, revealing the raw, ugly anger underneath. Starmer is still technically in office, but power has already left the building. And as the news spreads to the streets, the mood is shifting from shock to something far more dangerous. If you care about the future of this country, do not look away. Subscribe, stay glued to the screen, because what happens in the next 24 hours will decide the fate of the United Kingdom. The explosion we just witnessed did not happen in a vacuum. It is the inevitable result of a political class that has spent months ignoring the flashing red lights on the dashboard. Starmer's government has been sleepwalking into this disaster, fueled by arrogance and a total detachment from the reality of life outside the M25. Inflation remains stubborn. Immigration figures have hit stratospheric highs, despite promises to the contrary, and public services are crumbling before our eyes. The electorate has been simmering with rage, and today, Nigel Farage brought a match to the gasoline. It began innocuously enough, a question on border control, but the tone was different. Farage didn't just ask a question, he delivered an indictment. He accused the Prime Minister of deliberate betrayal, of lying to the electorate, and of presiding over the managed decline of the nation. The words were sharp, weaponized, and designed to draw blood, and they worked. Starmer tried to deflect with standard bureaucratic jargon, the kind of polished non-answers that have infuriated the public for years. But today, the chamber wasn't having it. The jeering started low, a rumble of discontent, before erupting into a roar of open hostility. And then came the pivot point. Starmer, visibly rattled, made the fatal mistake of attacking the voters themselves, dismissing the concerns raised by reform as illegitimate noise. That was the spark. The opposition benches erupted, but crucially, the Labour benches behind him did not move. They sat like statues. It was a visual vote of no confidence that was more damaging than any ballot could ever be. Farage seized the moment with ruthless efficiency, gesturing to the silent Labour MPs and shouting that even the Prime Minister's own army had deserted him. It was political theatre of the most brutal kind, and Starmer had no answer. The Speaker, completely out of his depth, tried to intervene. He demanded retractions, he threatened suspensions, but the authority of the chair only exists if the House consents to it, and today, consent was withdrawn. The shouting matches spilled into the aisles, fingers were pointed, accusations of treason were hurled across the floor, and the decorum that has held Parliament together for centuries evaporated in seconds. This was a breakdown of the social contract inside the chamber. If the lawmakers cannot follow the rules, why should the rest of the country?
We are witnessing the collision of two irreconcilable forces. On one side, a technocratic establishment that believes it has a divine right to rule, regardless of results. On the other, a populist insurgency that is channeling the raw, unfiltered anger of a population that feels abandoned. Today, the insurgency won. Starmer looked small. He looked weak. He looked like a man who had brought a spreadsheet to a knife fight. And as the session was suspended in chaos, the realization hit everyone watching. This government is effectively dead in the water. It may twitch for a few more weeks, but the brain activity has ceased. The fallout from this confrontation is going to nuclear. The media is already framing this as the end of the Starmer project. Conservative MPs who have been watching from the sidelines are now smelling blood, realizing that the chaotic energy unleashed by Farage is tearing the Labour government apart faster than they ever could. The political map is being redrawn in real time. The old rules of engagement, courtesy, procedure, precedent have been torched. We are in a bare-knuckle brawl for the soul of the nation, and right now, the man with the loudest voice is winning. The moment Parliament was suspended, the crisis metastasized from a political dispute into a national emergency. News networks immediately cut their feeds to live shots of the Palace of Westminster, where the confusion was palpable. Inside the lobby, journalists were actually running, to catch MPs fleeing the chamber. The reports coming out are contradictory and panicked. Some sources claim Starmer is holding an emergency cabinet meeting right now. Others suggest that senior civil servants have advised him to stay in his office for his own safety. This is the language of failed states, not the United Kingdom.
Outside the gates of Parliament, the reaction was instantaneous. Within minutes of the clash, crowds began to gather. But these are not the usual organized protests with printed placards. These are spontaneous, angry gatherings. Supporters of Farage are chanting, claiming victory, sensing that the establishment fortress has finally been breached. Meanwhile, Starmer loyalists, what few remain, are nowhere to be seen. The streets belong to the insurgents. Police vans are arriving in droves, sirens wailing, turning Parliament Square into a fortress. The visual of blue lights flashing against the ancient stone of Westminster is a stark symbol of a democracy in distress. Social media has become a war zone. The clip of Starmer freezing, his mouth opening and closing without sound as the chamber roared, has been viewed millions of times in less than an hour. It is being memified, analyzed, and weaponized. For millions of voters, that 5-second clip is the defining image of his premiership. It confirms everything they suspected, that when the pressure is truly on, the leadership is hollow. The hashtag #StarmerOut is trending globally, not just in the UK. The world is watching Britain unravel, and the humiliation is total. But the most dangerous aspect of this fallout is the institutional paralysis. With Parliament suspended and the Prime Minister's authority in tatters, the machinery of government is grinding to a halt. Civil servants are terrified. They operate on the assumption of ministerial authority, but when a minister cannot even speak in the Commons without being shouted down, that authority evaporates. Leaks are already springing from Whitehall. Senior officials are anonymously briefing the press that the government is functionally inoperative. They are asking the terrifying question, who is actually giving the orders? This is where the danger lies. A power vacuum in the center of a G7 economy is a recipe for catastrophe. While politicians argue decisions are not being made, emergency bills are stalled, economic strategies are frozen, the country is drifting toward the rocks, and there is nobody at the wheel. Farage knows this. He is banking on the chaos. His strategy is not to take over the government today, but to make the current government impossible to sustain. And judging by the scenes we just witnessed, his strategy is working perfectly. The narrative has shifted away from policy and towards legitimacy. The question is no longer about tax rates or hospital waiting times. It is about whether Keir Starmer has the moral authority to occupy Downing Street. The opposition has successfully framed him not just as incompetent, but as an imposter, a man squatting in number 10 while the country burns. This delegitimization is the most potent weapon in politics, and once it takes hold, it is almost impossible to shake. Starmer is now fighting not for his policies, but for his political life. The tremors of this political earthquake are now reaching the bedrock of the economy, and the readings are critical. The City of London does not deal in emotions, it deals in stability. And right now, UK PLC looks like a reckless gamble. The pound has taken a sharp dive against the dollar and the euro as international investors look at the chaos in Westminster and hit the sell button. They see a government that cannot pass legislation, a prime minister who cannot command the House, and an opposition that is burning the House down. Capital is fleeing to safer havens, and every percentage point drop in the currency makes the cost of living crisis for ordinary families even worse.
Business leaders are watching in horror. Major investment decisions are being paused. Who would commit millions of pounds to a country where the government might collapse by the weekend? The Confederation of British Industry has issued a statement calling for urgent clarity, which is diplomatic code for fix this mess before you destroy the economy. But there is no clarity to be found. The Chancellor is reportedly missing in action, likely trying to put out fires within the Treasury, but silence in a market panic is deadly. The economic competence that Labour campaigned on has been shredded in a single afternoon of madness. Internationally, the reaction is a mixture of pity and alarm. Diplomatic cables are flying back to Washington, Brussels, and Beijing. Allies are worried. Britain is a key NATO member, a nuclear power, and a permanent member of the UN Security Council. If the UK government is paralyzed by internal chaos, the entire Western alliance is weakened. Adversaries will see this as an opportunity. Russian state media is already gleefully replaying the footage of the parliamentary collapse, framing it as proof of the failure of Western democracy. We are handing our enemies a propaganda victory on a silver platter. But the deepest damage is being done to the trust of the British people. For years, voters have been told to be patient, to trust the process, to tighten their belts. They were promised that the adults were back in the room. Today, they saw that the room is actually a playground, and the adults are nowhere to be found. The contrast between the struggles of everyday people, paying bills, finding a dentist, keeping their heads above water, and the childish, destructive behavior in Westminster is nauseating. It feels like a betrayal, a massive, unforgivable breach of contract between the rulers and the ruled.
The constitutional implications are also beginning to surface. Constitutional lawyers are arguing over whether the Speaker has the power to indefinitely suspend the House to prevent violence. Others are asking if the King needs to intervene. These are questions that should never have to be asked in a modern democracy. We are treading into dark, uncharted legal territory. If Parliament cannot sit because it is too chaotic, do we still have a democracy? Or do we have a hollow shell where a democracy used to be? The system is being stress-tested to destruction, and the cracking sounds are getting louder. The tragedy is that there is no easy off-ramp. If Starmer tries to cling on, the paralysis deepens. If he calls an election, he does so from a position of historic weakness, plunging the country into 6 weeks of uncertainty. If he resigns, the Labour Party will tear itself apart trying to replace him. Every door leads to a different kind of disaster. The country is trapped in a doom loop of political dysfunction, and the people paying the price are the ones watching from home, wondering how it all went so wrong so fast. We are now staring into the abyss. The events of today have shattered the illusion of stability that has held this country together for decades. The unspoken agreement that, no matter how bad things get, the government will continue to function has been broken. We have crossed a line. The taboo against total parliamentary chaos has been smashed, and now that it has happened once, it will happen again. The precedent is set. Escalation is the new normal. This is not just a crisis of leadership, it is a crisis of the system itself. The two-party structure that has dominated British politics for a century is buckling under the weight of a fragmented, angry electorate. Farage's assault on Starmer is merely the symptom of a deeper disease, a political class that no longer represents the people it claims to serve. The disconnect is absolute. And when the disconnect becomes this wide, history teaches us that something snaps. We are hearing that snap right now. As night falls over London, the questions hanging in the air are terrifying. Can Keir Starmer survive the week? Can the police maintain order if the protests grow? Will the market stabilize or crash further tomorrow morning? But the biggest question remains unanswered. Is this the bottom? Or is this just the opening chapter of a much darker story? The anger we saw today was not manufactured. It was real. It has been growing for years, fed by broken promises and ignored grievances. And now that it has found a voice in the chamber, it will not be silenced easily. The establishment will try to patch this up. They will issue statements calling for calm. They will try to return to business as usual. But the public has seen too much. You cannot unring the bell. The authority of the state relies on the belief that the people in charge know what they are doing. That belief died today. We are now in a post-authority era, where power is not given, but taken. Britain is sliding into its most dangerous political showdown in living memory. The institutions we rely on are blinking red. The economy is trembling. The people are furious. And the politicians are too busy fighting each other to notice the cliff edge they are driving us towards. This is not a drill. This is the collapse of a political era. And as we look at the wreckage of today, one thing is chillingly clear. The worst is yet to come. Stay watching, stay alert, because the Britain you woke up in this morning no longer exists.